Good morning, everybody. Let's get started. Waste no more of your time. I'm here to talk today about CCE log collection. Good morning, everyone. Looks like we've got quite a few people out there. Actually, I guess for some of you, it's probably good afternoon, good evening. I see some old school names and faces out there. Well, no faces. None of you have your video enabled, but hello to all of you. Log collection is the subject of today's conversation. And let's tell you what the agenda is this morning and get going right on down the road. So first off, introductions. My name is Mike Keitzer. I'm I guess at this point in time, a senior technical instructor is what they call me. Yes, when you get gray, you become a senior technical instructor. Here at Sunset Learning, I've been around here for quite a long time, over 20 years, they tell me. And mostly doing a lot of contact center stuff, contact center express along the way, UC stuff, route switch, et cetera, et cetera. Today, I'm here to talk to you about some CCE things. New thing going is really packaged, but all of this applies to unified contact center, packaged contact center, all of those products combined into one. So we'll get into an overview here shortly of log collection, just some, I guess, maybe best practices. And then what we'll do is go over a smattering of log collection tools, including the Diagnostic Framework Suite, some old school tools. I'll talk about Finesse Logging, Spog, logging considerations. Spog, remember, is the single pane of glass we use for the packaged environment. And the big thing, I guess, that you maybe want to take out of this is that you don't have to use all of these tools. You don't really have to use any of these tools. I guess if you never have anything broken or never need to look at logs. I don't know too many people who just look at logs when stuff's working, but maybe you should. Maybe you should get an idea, a benchmark of what stuff looks like when it does work. Who knows? Regardless, though, back to the point of this conversation, all of these tools, or certainly most or a lot of these tools, can pull the same types of information. You don't need to know all of them. You just need to know maybe what your favorite tool is, what works best for you, what's easily transportable within your environment, and pick one of those, go with it. Finesse logging, that's a newer topic of conversation in some of our courses. Got some good stuff in there for finesse logging. Collecting logs using the Spog, little star beside the screen here indicates that this may only be available based on certain deployment models that you may or may not have. So we'll get into that. Also some version 12 logging considerations around personally identifiable information that you'd want to be aware of in the CCE environment. All right, so log collection overview. Quite a few slides here. These will go pretty quickly. Ask questions if you got them along the way. Eden, maybe if she's out there monitoring chat, let me know if somebody's trying to chat me up. Otherwise, I'm going to make some time here since I was a bit late. But basically with logging, one of the things I would probably recommend, working with the system for quite a long time, I believe other people would as well, is that, I try to do my darndest to try to fix things without looking at any log files. I don't really want to look at log files unless I have to, or unless I'm trying to show you, hey, your problem is logged right here. So before you go and looking at logs, make sure that everything else is working as advertised, right? Is stuff plugged in, turned on, configured correctly. Start at a high level, work your way down to logs. Try to use other available tools that'll help you identify a problem. The assumption here is, I guess, you're looking at logs because you have an issue. So try to use other tools that'll help you to look at errors or events that might help you solve an issue without looking at logs. Use call tracer, script and monitor mode, or calls actually hitting the script. Can you ping the device that seems to be down? Is it not turned on? Et cetera, et cetera. If you're looking at logs, try to look at logs without increasing tracing. A pretty popular question when we start looking at logs, people say, hey, how do I turn up tracing? You go, well, why do you need to? Most of the things that we show you if you come to class where you have issues, most information is logged at a reasonable level that at least should point you in the right general direction of where to go to look at fixing the issue. That's not true with all cases, but for the most part, you ought to be able to find something without turning up tracing. Okay. If you need to turn up tracing, do that under somebody's supervision or somebody who knows what you're trying to do. Otherwise, you might produce a resume producing event. That's never a good issue to have as a subsequent error. Think about where the problem is not when you're troubleshooting. If all else fails, prepare 3 envelopes. So there you go. Key core components of the CCE solution, as we all know, just kind of breaking things down by chunks, packaged or CCE really consists of, on the right-hand side over here, ICM or CCE, Finesse, CVP, Call Manager, Unified Communications Manager, and various and sundry gateway devices, ingress gateways, egress gateways, VXML gateways, VVBs, etc. Key thing maybe to understand these log files is that some things are logged in plain text and quite easily to actually go out and look at, like CVP, by example. If you know an offending CVP server, it's a Windows server, logs are all written in plain readable text. You can just simply go out there with Notepad and open up a log file to your heart's content, and off you go. Other things like the Finesse servers, CUCM, other components like CUIC, et cetera, those things are all running that voice operating system, VOS, and those are a little bit harder to look at log files unless you know some specific URLs or ways to look at those things. We'll discuss some of those along the way. Voice gateways, we know all those things never have problems or go down, and various debugs. So we won't mention a lot of voice gateway things. The VVB would apply with the VOS systems, but ICM over here on the top right-hand side, as you would know, if you ever need to look at ICM log files, those things are written in some kind of proprietary format, so you cannot just simply open those with Notepad and have a look at them. So key components we'll talk about, general logging across. Another just note on logging, I threw the slide in here, one of many that you would see if you come to our CCE courses where we talk about call flows and components, and this slide talks about protocols. And just a note on protocols that goes hand in hand with logging, right? Don't be looking for SIP log events over here in ICM. ICM doesn't speak SIP, it speaks other protocols. Got a bunch of other translators along the way doing all their protocol translation stuff, serving as gateways. So make sure you understand the protocol you're trying to look at. And to that point, what you might see in log files. Debugging HTTP events and SIP events kind of fall into the same bailiwick of things you might expect in the form of error codes and whatnot. Okay? So nothing specific there, just be aware of the protocols you're using between components and really where the problem is. Unless somebody's asking you for all log files, just don't go pull a bunch of log files. Try to think about what log files are going to get you the best end result of trying to fix your issue that you're probably trying to troubleshoot. All right, so let's take a look at some of these tools for log collection. Let's start off with this thing called the Diagnostic Framework Suite. Diagnostic Framework Suite is built into all of your CCE servers. There's multiple ways, as we'll talk about, for how to connect up to and navigate within the Diagnostic Framework Suite. It's accessed specifically in 4 ways. One of the ways we access the Diagnostic Framework Suite is actually within RTMT. You may have historically used RTMT mostly for CUCM activities, but as we'll show you here, the analysis manager within the RTMT will allow you to actually go out there and pull log files from ICM and CVP and VVBs and gateways and any and all kinds of devices, not just Unified Communications Manager. There's a system CLI tool. That's a command line tool. We'll talk about that. That's, I'm a command line-ish person, but I don't know. That tool is fairly rigorous to get set up. I think in a very static environment, it would benefit you. Some of you probably love that tool. I think bang for your buck, we'll talk about the Diagnostic Framework Portico. That's a quick down and dirty. I got to pull a log file easily from somewhere. Pretty nice tool. We can also access the Diagnostic Framework basically via APIs directly via URL. Before you're trying to go mess around using these Diagnostic Framework tools, ideally it's a good idea to have systems set up so that you can immediately go and start using them without trying to figure out how to use the command line tool at the last second when somebody's breathing down your neck. So a little bit of an overview on that. We've got a Active Directory user configured that we've added to the config security group in our instance in domain manager in ICM. This user has a name of Fixit. That's kind of our service account user. And this grants that user access to see into our ICM environment. We've also done the same thing over in Communications Manager land. We've added this user either as an LDAP user or just as a local user here and given them some specific rights to some built-in groups to allow this user to actually go out there and make use of RTMT or the Diagnostic Framework Portico. And this is no different than what you'd have to set up with a user to access RTMT anyway. So pretty straightforward. And then we're going to talk about Analysis Manager. Analysis Manager is the first tool just in discussion within the Diagnostic Framework suite of things. It comes from within RTMT, Real-Time Monitoring Tool, which, as you know, we just download from Communications Manager. Unity has a place where I think last I checked, you can download RTMT. A lot of people wonder about RTMT. I say, hey, is RTMT version 12 from Call Manager? It is from downloaded from somewhere else. And people go, oh, no, it's not. It's different. Well, no, it's the same stuff, just different maybe based on where you log into. So notice that we bring up RTMT and we're actually logging into Call Manager here with our Fixit account. In this case, we're showing you 12.5. And normally in RTMT, we'd go to System and look at Call Manager, device registrations, et cetera, But step 4 down here below, notice we're in this thing called the Analysis Manager. If you don't see the Analysis Manager when you log into RTMT, maybe you need a newer version of RTMT. Maybe you didn't log into the Communications Manager cluster. Who knows? But we're in Analysis Manager. Of nodes here. The nodes we can add, in this case, a couple of roggers, a PG. I think some on the list, we actually show you, we've got all kinds of different nodes we can add. We can add nodes for CDP and gateways, IM&P, servers, basically anything you might want. However, in this brief output, just trying to show you that the RTMT, the Analysis Manager within there, is a way to go out and look at log files. Here we're actually doing a view configuration. We can do that across one or multiple servers in the list. And what that actually produces for us is an output that maybe people at TAC might want: dump config, export all of your ICM config, export your registry, license platform information, et cetera, all in one nice zip file. So that's cool. We can also use RTMT to go out and grab just trace files. So here I'm just simply setting a findable path in the future for where my log files are going to be found. Seems like by default RTMT likes to hide files on me. And I'm going to use RTMT's Analysis Manager to go out and collect trace files. So here I'm selecting a specific node, PGA in this case. I can go down there and pick a start time and end time. I can customize this, and I can go out and look at things like my CTI server, or maybe my PIM that's trying to talk to Communications Manager across that connection. So knowing what processes and what log files to look at is the other half of this battle that we certainly don't get into in this discussion. That was I guess, based on your historical knowledge of the process. But again, trying to pinpoint a specific log file on a component that we hope can show us some information is the key thing. And what comes out of that after some point in time is actually text readable log files that we can see events happening. I'm not sure we actually have some kind of a error to show you in this particular log, but this certainly looks a whole lot better and pretty easy to pull than just trying to go out there and look at that log directly, which would show up in not very usable context. There's a System CLI tool as well. System CLI tool is a command line tool. It basically does the same thing that your other tools can do. It'll allow you to look at things and change trace values and show processes, set trace levels. There is a way to initialize this thing called system mode, and system mode can allow you to go out and look across a variety of your CCE solutions. But very much like the Analysis Manager in the Portico, you basically have to seed a text file with all of the correct information about the servers and server types, and notice what the username and password is out there. that we're trying to use to connect up. So again, using that same service account information to connect up via the command line across components using this command line tool. Bang for your buck, this thing again, I think if you used it a lot, you could get very proficient. You could probably script your way through a lot of commands to actually get log files or look at events, but not a good tool to probably start off with at the last moment, right? So here by example is a command ultimately figured out: show tech support server PGA, redirect directory C:\/ class logs. That would be a way to actually run a command to output log files from the PG to a folder. And again, trying to figure out that command line syntax at a moment's notice is probably not the easiest thing in the world. But nevertheless, another tool you can use. So make some hay here. Diagnostic Framework Portico, you've probably seen as a shortcut on all of your ICM servers. It actually works across a bunch of CCE servers overall, as long as you get the URL correctly. Notice we're opening up the Diagnostic Framework Portico, logging in as our Fix-It user. And we see the welcome screen on the Portico and a bunch of commands on the left-hand side. This is a nice, easy to use, browser-based utility that we can easily use to do things like list services. Service control, as you might know, if it's open on one computer already, you can't open it up. You can always go into Windows services. Unfortunately, one thing I think is kind of sad that happened is it looks like in version 12, they've removed the select button from ICM service control. So you can't any longer use it to navigate between servers. I'm not sure why that is, but that's the way it is here. This Portico can help you to look across systems to see if things like your PGs are running or not, or your routers or loggers are running. And again, what we try to preach in class is running is one thing, working is an entirely different thing. So if you actually want to see if stuff is working or not, hopefully you're using the Diagnostic Framework Portico to list processes, make sure that things like your PIMs and your JTAPI gateways are active in this particular screenshot. And again, that's a good substitute for having to go look at a log file. That's just an easy glance to say, well, I don't know, looks like things are active and connected, or at least maybe you would know which side of the PG you should go look at log files on. That might actually show you more active information back and forth. Remember, the Portico shows you things in color. If things have been down for less than 10 minutes, they'll show up in red. Between 10 and 30 minutes, the colors go to yellow, and then after 30 minutes, it goes devoid of color. So that's just to help you out initially there. One thing you may not have known, though, is in the Diagnostic Framework Portico, you can actually use the Portico to go out there and look at some of your log files, or do what we call list trace files. So here what we're showing you is a couple of things. We can do a list trace components. We see that some stuff is loggable, I guess. We can do a get trace level. We can see what trace level is set to. We can do a set trace level over there if we want to change that. That's cool. And on the next one, we're doing a list trace files. Good and bad things about the Portico. Good, it's pretty doggone easy to use. Bad thing, which is really not that bad, you can only really go out and grab one process log file at a time. So in this kind of small screenshot up here, you can kind of see what we're doing is we're going out to our PG and grabbing PIM1 log file. We can also specify some dates and times when we want to grab the log file from, hit submit, and shortly thereafter, out comes a zip file, which we open up that zip file. We can actually see down here a whole bunch of logs that got produced, or a log that got produced, hopefully with indication of what our problem actually is. So bang for your buck, I think that's a pretty good tool. Some old school collection tools. Of course, dumplog. I love dumplog because, you know, it's pretty down and dirty. If you can get me access to that server, I can, you know, use dumplog to go out and grab those log files. And again, part of the process or problem, I guess, when trying to get a log file from an ICM server is the fact that the log files, or the EMS files, event management system files, are written in a proprietary format. So you've got to use something other than Notepad to look at these logs. Imperative, as we're showing you here in the screenshot, that we get to the right folder location. There's a ICM utility called CD log. If you're not a very good command line person, CD log if you change in your instance and your component. In this case, trying to change into our PCCE1 instance, PG1A. Notice that takes me right into the log files folder. I can use the dumplog utility to actually go out there and look at a process name, specify an output file, beginning time, ending time, etc., etc. I don't have to use all of these command line switches. A couple of my favorites, though, are the output file. You know, the /last is the last log file. The /prev is the previous log file before that. I kind of like to use the hours back as well. I know, hey, this happened about 2 hours ago. So dumplog is pretty cool. Vru Trace is another command line utility. Looks like we got somebody chatting up here. Does logs download from RTMT be in GZ format by default? No. Typically what happens with those log files is that over time, ICM will actually go out there and convert them to a zipped file format, in this case, a GZ format. But that doesn't stop you, I guess, from looking at logs. I'm not sure if that helps with the question from that, but I think if you look from RTMT, those files just come in a zipped file format when you're actually just using RTMT to grab those. I believe that to be true. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but let me know if it doesn't. Okay, Vru Trace is another utility you may or may not know about, but if you need to actually do a trace between your PG and CVP, as an example, or your VRU, the Vru Trace utility will allow you to do that. It's very much a command line utility similar to dumplog, except for we have to be in a different folder. So notice I'm in PCCE1, PG3A, I'm in the VRU cap folder versus previous page showed us we were in the log files folder. So in the VRU cap folder is where I'm going to use the Vru trace command. Again, several command line switches to know about. Here I'm using a Vru trace on PIM1. I'm going to look at the last log file. That's the most current log file. I'm going to output that file to a file on the C drive named test3.txt. I believe on the next page, we actually show you some of the output of test3.txt. And just kind of a snippet that you can see basically communication that goes between the VRU and the PG. So this would be CVP talking to the PG to say, hey, here's some information. And in the next highlighted snippet down below, communication back from the PG back to the VRU. If you actually look at a log file for a very simple startup of the system, you'd actually see that what happens initially is the VRU goes out to the PG to say, hey, I know about all these variables, send to VRU, server information. These are all of your micro app variables that get loaded up. And what they declare is really just the variable number in the future. So instead of having to say, here's some information for CVP server info, one side just says, hey, here's some information for variable number 29. Variable 29 has been assigned to that CVP server info variable. So kind of a cool utility to look at some log files between CVP and the PG. Finesse logging. Let's see how we're doing time-wise here. Got about 20 minutes, so I think we can do all right. Finesse logging is a consideration if you've got problems with agents and agent desktops. Where do you go to look at stuff? Well, one of the things we're kind of showing you here is, first off, make sure that if you're talking to Finesse or having problems with Finesse, make sure the PG that's talking to call manager is running. Make sure the CTI gateway or CTI server that's talking to call manager is also running. Remember that your Finesse server actually makes a connection to your CTI server, also known as your CTI gateway. On the other end of that connection over there is call manager. Remember, Finesse's job, as I see it, is to do this thing called CTI. That's taking your computer you're using and that telephone that's registered over there to call manager and try to bridge the two of those things together. So when it comes time to looking at log files, right, log files you're looking at would be dependent on maybe which side of that Finesse server you're trying to look at. RTMT, the command line tool, Portico, dumplog, Spog, all that stuff we outlined is all valid for these connections on the left-hand side over on your PG or your CTI gateway. if that's where your problem you assume exists. This conversation for this little section over here focuses a little bit more on the interaction between the agent desktop itself and the Finesse server, where we'll talk about a couple of protocols, BOSH and XMPP. Okay. Speaking of which, BOSH and XMPP. BOSH, don't know if you knew this or not, stands for Bidirectional Streams over Synchronous HTTP. What the heck is that? Well, transport protocol, well adapted to web or mobile clients on what they're terming here intermittent networks. I didn't term that, but I think that's pretty good use of that process. My network at home here, right, not too long ago was pretty intermittent overall. Now, again, it has to have power applied, but out wandering around, going between cell towers, driving down the road, trying to be logged on as an agent as well. Not that would really work, but I guess that's what BOSH is well suited for. And so it's really a tunneling protocol, I would say, that's carrying this thing called XMPP, open technologies for multiple collaboration methods based on XML. If you look at stuff like Jabber, I believe Jabber is based on XMPP. So this Finesse conversation between your web browser and the Finesse server, bunch of XMPP, some XML-ish stuff that's being tunneled in this BOSH connection. Why do we care about that? The reason we care about that is that this BOSH tunnel gets set up between the agent and Finesse server about every 30 seconds. The XMPP messages flow through that tunnel. And if, again, you're looking at some HTTP stuff or really SIP-like error message, you should understand that a status of 200 is always a status meaning okay in the HTTP world, which SIP adheres to. And how that applies to our real-world experience is that if there is some kind of an issue between that tunnel or this intermittent network, you might see that red banner show up. And it says condition can last between 1 to 30 seconds. What happens every 30 seconds? That BOSH tunnel gets set up. So notice it says it's self-correcting and no manual recovery needed if it's under 30 seconds. During this time, it might lose some CTI functionality. After 30 seconds, maybe some bad thing is happening and you need to start looking at log files. What the heck's actually going on here? Right? So do some due diligence. Make sure you try a couple of different browsers, try somebody else's workstation. Is it localized to just one computer? Is it a whole bunch of people? The first thing I did after I called my bosses out there to say, hey, I lost power, is I called my neighbor's house. Hey, is it just my house or is it the neighbor's house? Well, neighbors had lost power as well. So there you go. All right, so back to Finesse client logging. If you need to look at log files, show you a picture here. If I need to look at log files between the Finesse agent desktop, the agent using Finesse, and the Finesse server, one of the most convenient ways to do that would be to have the agent out there enable some client logging. So here we're showing you the agent desktop on the left-hand side. We notice we've got an agent logged in. Old Harry Callahan is logged in here as agent 44. That's the agent ID as configured in CCE. If you randomly assign those numbers, this might not be quite as easy as you had hoped, but assuming you can find that agent ID number, and assuming the agent clicks on the send error report button if they're having some errors or issues, what you should now be able to do is go to your Finesse server. So notice in step 3 down below, we're just using a simple browser, going to our Finesse server, the fully qualified domain name, port 8445 Finesse logs. If you were to actually just stop in logs, you'd actually see a bunch of different folders of logs. One of the folders is client logs. And in client logs, you'd see a whole bunch of log files. Notice those log files are in zip format. And did you know, a lot of people have an aha moment right here, that those digits right in the middle of that log file are the easy way to actually figure out of all those logs which agent you're actually trying to look at log files for. So in this case, 44 matches up as the agent ID for Harry Callahan in this particular example. You've got some other alternative options. Again, we don't have any error that we're looking at. We're just pointing out where these log files are. Another couple of valid options, if you're actually out there on site next to the agent and you're pretty good at it, you could also use the developer's tools built into your browsers. I see a lot of the, call it the less gray generation doing that, right? They just go right for the developers tools. They don't bother with looking at log files. It's just right there. It's going by. Now, it might go by a little bit quick to see what's going on, but here we can actually see our agent going from a not ready state to ready state, all the things that happen in between there. Same thing you would see if you looked at log files actually on the Finesse server, just more of a live view. So a couple of ways to look at Finesse server-side logs. We showed you actually a URL that you could use directly to go to the Finesse server via the web. There's a command line tool you could actually use to look at log files. Do a file get active log /desktop/log/star recursive compress. It's a lot of information there, but that's ways to do that from the command line. And of course, RTMT as well, the analysis manager within there. You could, if you add your Finesse server into RTMT, go out there and look at log files. One thing you might run into is maybe I've got problems where the agent can't actually log into Finesse and produce log files. Well, that's not very convenient. What you may or may not know is this thing called persistent logging. So notice at the bottom of this page here, let me highlight this. We've got a different URL. So instead of just going to the Finesse server as you normally use to log into Finesse as an agent, go to a slightly different URL, desktop/locallog. That's going to produce basically a different interface initially here. Try it when you go back to the ranch that would actually allow you to sign in with persistent logging. And so if you're unable to actually get to that Finesse login screen to click on that send error report, you might try this. What you'll then do is view the same URL in a different browser. So what we're kind of trying to show you here is that maybe another administrator or another browser on that same machine, you've actually got that same URL up and looking at those logged events kind of live is what you're doing. So anyway, give that a shot when you go back to the ranch and see if that works for you. All right, Spog logging considerations. Spog stands for single pane of glass. Some of you have probably been working with package now for a bit of time. Maybe some of you are brand new to this thing called the Spog in the packaged world. If you're a CCE customer, you don't have this thing called the Spog. It's only if you're a packaged customer. And basically what the Spog is just the next generation of the CCE web admin tool, where we've taken a bunch of stuff from Configuration Manager, where we historically configured things like agents and skill groups and whatnot, and boom, moved it over to this thing called the Spog. Well, depending on your version and your deployment model specifically, under the infrastructure settings card, there may or may not be a log collection tool. If you're a package customer, go look at that. In my experience, some of the larger customers, the 12K deployment models, don't have this log collection tool. Can't tell you exactly why, but it's a pretty handy tool if you see it out there. So nice thing about this tool, it allows you to easily go out there across your components. You can see for CCE, that'd be all of your ICM servers, Communications Manager, CVP, Finesse, CUIC. I can go out there and grab specific components. I can set trace levels back to normal results or increase trace level results. And I can go out there and basically pick a time, starting in an end time, to go out there and grab some log files. Those log files get downloaded. I can open them up and take a look at my errors or events as needed. So here we're downloading a log file, opening that log file up, and under the trace collections folder for the output in our date time stamped process, we can actually see, looks like we went out there and grabbed 3 different servers. Rogger, a PG, and a DAW is what we're actually showing up here. So there you go. Here is, by example, our PIM log file trace extract that we're able to easily see, again, via the Spog, just the same way that we saw with Analysis Manager earlier, or the Diagnostic Framework Portico. One thing you might run into is just general issues with the Spog. You're trying to use the Spog, you're trying to look at an inventory, and you get some kind of error occurred while connecting to the server. Where the heck do I go to actually look at log files that are just Spog based in nature? And your answer to that is your primary DAW. Now, depending on your deployment model, your primary DAW should be listed within the inventory of your package deployment. If you're a smaller 2K deployment model or a lab-only deployment model, it's going to be the first DAW that was actually installed along the way. And it's that server that's going to help you look at log files. You can, of course, use developers tools as well. But if you go to that server, wherever ICM was installed to the ICM folder Tomcat logs location, that's exactly where you're going to actually get a couple of logs that will show up. So notice here we're in the D drive under the ICM Tomcat logs folder. And I'm going to do a sort by the date and time out here, and a couple of logs to look at, the CCBU log file and the error log file, two pretty good places for resources. When you go out there and look at those logs, you'll probably generally notice the error log file probably smaller than the CCBU log file. That's just in my general experience. Not always, but generally. And that would probably make you go to look at the error log file first, plus you're shooting troubles on errors. And I guess what I've kind of found in version 12 is that my error might be listed in the error log file, tell me, yeah, you got a problem. But if I actually want to see the details of that error by default, I'm actually usually better off opening up that CCBU log file. Might be larger in nature, but probably the details you're after are somewhere within there. And make sure that when you're troubleshooting stuff, if you can at all possible, try to pinpoint, if there's Spog error events in nature, try to pinpoint that time of the event. That log file, that CCBU log file, a bunch of stuff going on in there. But if you can pinpoint that event, you can generally get a pretty good idea of what's happening out there. And so in this example over here, we can see that we're trying to talk to another ICM server out here from our Spog server. And what we actually had is some kind of certificate issue, unable to find valid certification path to requested target. If I ever see this thing called PKIX error, that full on stands for public key infrastructure, which full on means you probably got some kind of certificate error that you're troubleshooting out there. So there you go. Here's a good example of some kind of a log output. We had some kind of an error, stuff wasn't working, went to the log file, and I got the error message that said something about the address null on null is not associated with a valid host name in DNS. Hostname localhost is registered for null in DNS, does not have an entry in the forward lookup zone. So what the heck? And then some other output said something about message string, get private host name, error while fetching the secondary IP address. Any thoughts on what the problem was there based on just the output of the log file? Anybody want to venture a guess? We'll give you a couple seconds. If no, well, what it actually came down to is, makes sense after the fact. Didn't actually have a private network address put in DNS for, I think, one of the PGs I was trying to build. So doggone it, the Spog knew about that. And again, the point here being, a lot of times you have to read into the error message itself and go, what is it really telling me? Get private host name, secondary IP address. All that stuff should be meaning something to you, assuming you know about ICM and private networks and whatnot. So take a moment to digest what the error is actually telling you and figure that out. Okay, almost done here, people. A couple things you ought to know about in version 12. No longer on your routers or PGs do we actually log ECC variable or peripheral variable information by default. So if you've been used to looking at some process, looking at call variable information back and forth between components, and you wake up to version 12 and go, hey, where'd all that stuff go? Well, just because of PII or personal identifiable informational logging, i.e. your security of your data, by default, ICM doesn't log all of your PV or ECC variable information. Easily, you can turn it up. If you're on a router and you want to see more information in the router and script editor, RT test you'd want to use to enable that. Notice here to enable it, we're turning on debug/peripheral variables or debug ECC variables. Turn it off when you're done. If you're an OPC test on a PG, similar commands. And if you're on a PIM using procmon, a couple of valid ways to turn up debugging for that as well. Notice changes cannot be made from the Portico or the CLI. Changes are dynamic, and that happens, of course, on both sides of the equation. So just some general version 12 logging considerations. I think, people, what I've done is I've managed to get us almost caught back up to speed. I got 4 minutes left to tell you that, A, we appreciate your time today, and B, we're kind of waiting on Cisco to come out officially with their announcement on the curriculum that Mark and Bruce and I have been working hard the last couple of really 18 months or more on developing. So these courses are out shortly. Check with your local salesperson about our foundations and admin course that kind of replaced the old course where we just initially got into CCE. Is all based on package these days. So, and we've kind of broken things down to smaller days. If you're just in a more looking at CCE or dealing with CCE and need to understand it overall, Foundations course, pretty good course for you. 1 day executive overview, might say, of CCE. The admin course, the basic moves, adds, and changes course. The place you should start if you're brand new to CCE is the CCE administration course. Follow on after that 1 day overview. We've got an advanced admin course of 3 days that's usually followed by the reporting 2-day course. Those usually run in the same week. Has really a total of 5 days, but you can sign up for one or both of those if you want. And on another similar 1 week-ish track, we've got 3 days of implementation and 2-day troubleshooting course. That 2-day troubleshooting course got some good stuff in there, as does the implementation. This is all based on the packaged environment, PCCE. Okay. And don't forget, if you're an enterprise chat and email user, we've actually got a brand new version 12 course updated from version 10, 11, whatever the heck it was before that. And that's a great course you should attend. 4 days only for that. So you got 1 day of the week you can goof off. Big thank you. Thanks for bearing with us. Thanks for sticking it out here today.